So this video today I'm going to be looking at showing you how to use the Foundry VTT setup basically to try and run the fantasy trip. So I'm going to be using the GURPS Game Aid just by Nick and Nose to basically work with a system, and this is basically a way to show you the hacks plus some of the modules I've got with it. Bear in mind with me with this video because I have had to record the audio and visual separate, so it's kind of a bit of a voice for this one, so if the timing's not quite right I do apologise, but I shall try and remember what I was doing at the time of doing it. So the first thing I'm going to show you is a kind of the setup and kind of the basic way you can use it, and then some of the advanced features. So if you've got Foundry already, you'll see the setup you can see before you, basically showing you things. And the first thing you have to do is set up the game system. As you can see here, I have already got it installed. I already have the GURPS Game Aid installed in here, but you have to install it yourself. So to do that, you have to go down to the bottom and click on Install Systems down here that you can see. If you click on that, and if you click on the package name and just type in GURPS, and you'll find that it comes up then, and again, you can install it. Like I said, it's already installed in here. I don't have a version set up to show you, but it's kind of already on there, but you just install it, and it should unload the package into it, ready to go for you. So once that's installed, then you can just play it, as I said, that way. If you want to use the add-on modules are at the top, as you can see magnified here. So you click on there, and I'll show you some of the ones that I use. So again, you can search them by filtering here, which shows you what I've got. I've got the PDF character sheet here already installed as previously, so I use that basically to PDF sheets. If you want to install it again, have to go to install packages down the bottom there, click on the package name, and when it's finished loading on here, and then type in again PDF, and it's a PDF character sheet you want, not things like PDF Foundry for PF2 and stuff. It's one that just says PDF character sheet on the screen, as you can see. A few of the ones that I do use, I tend to use a couple of dice ones, so I have Dice on Ice and Dice Tray, so these are just quite useful things, A, for having 3D dice on the screen, and Dice Tray is quite good for rolling extra dice rather than just the 3d6 standard that comes with the GURPS Game Aid. But again, I'll install those, and you can just install those by again typing in dice into the install module, and you can bring them up and then play them in the game, but I won't go too much into that. You can mess around with that yourself. There are videos on how those things are used. First thing I do now is create a world, so we have to create a new world. This one I'm going to call Fantasy Test for this one. Let me just set the screen up here a second. So yeah, call it Fantasy Test just to, show you how it's going to work from the test point of view. And then the other thing I have to do is pick the game system, which again, in this case, you're going to pick the GURPS Game Aid to run this one, so it's GURPS Game Aid. There's options there to put a background image if you want, and also put things about your next session, and you've also got text down there if you want to type in some information for your players about what the game is. Now it's loaded, just go to the side and click Launch World, and that should bring it up. You have the option to put players in later on, and again there's other videos on that, but for now just choose Game of Master and start it from there, and it'll bring you into the system to basically see how that's going to run. So if you click Join Game as a Game of Master without a password initially, it should bring you into the game as it's set up. Just give it a minute to load again. So I'll just close down these things here that tell you about how to get started and stuff. Again, if you're setting up stuff, you can run it. First thing I do is show you how to make a character. So I tend to use the Mook generator to put mine in just because I find it the quickest, simplest way to build them rather than using character sheets and things. So this brings up a thing, and it's all based around GURPS, this. So again, a lot of the stuff's fairly redundant for you when you're making the characters yourself. The main thing to focus on is things like the name, so we'll call him Flavius, if I can spell it properly. And I tend to take out things like the title for them, and the appearance, don't really need those, so take them out for now. Again, you can add that information if you want, but it doesn't really affect the gameplay. I tend to take out the notes section, and I tend to take out things like the equipment section and spells and skills, because I'm not actually going to use those sections for a fantasy trip, so again, take those ones out. And I tend to take out the ranged weapons as well, because I tend to put them all in melee, which will become a bit more obvious to why I do that later on, but just keep all the things in there. Because fantasy trip doesn't use the same ranged implementation as GURPS does, I don't tend to use it so much. So I tend just to use the main stats, the sort of melee thing, and then the advantages, disadvantages. So for the stats, type in the information. Strength 12, Dex 12, for example, IQ 8 here, and then health we don't use, so we can make that 0. Likewise, fatigue points, don't use it in fantasy trip 0. Perception we can make 0, and will we can also make 0. We should make hit points 12 here, but I forget, but later on I fix it later on in this video, which we'll show you in a bit. But ideally you make the hit points the same as the strength, because that's how it works in the fantasy trip. Other things you want to work on here is move and speed. So move tends to be the main move allowance, and speed is usually adjusted dex. So I'm going to leave that at 12 just now, which is what his dex is from the play standard. So again, once that's done, you can then click on, move on to the melee weapons. So basically you want to put the melee weapons down here once you've done. DR is the thing to do first of all. So when you've got your armor in place, you do put DR as armor. So DR is a GURPS term, but it's effectively the number of hits your armor absorbs. So I'm going to put 2 in there for now, and I'll show you how we can adjust that later on. But if you know ahead of time, you can put that number straight in, and then when you do an implementation of damage later on, it should actually pull straight through, which is quite useful. As I said, put the melee weapons in first of all. So I'm going to put short sword in here first of all, if I could spell it again. And again, the thing in brackets is your level to hit, so it's based on dex, which is 12, so that's quite handy actually, because it's already up there. I'm going to put it as 8 because I know that's what it's going to be later on when I do it. And then the damage here, this is important. So the damage, you just type in normal damage as you would do in the fantasy trip, but you have to put DMG at the end of it because GURPS has different damage types. It does default to things like cutting, crushing, which has an effect in GURPS, but for fantasy trip we don't want any of that implementation, so we just type in DMG. So if you do DMG after all your damage for weapons in this game, it'll work that way. So again, the other thing we're going to put in here is the other potential weapons. So we're going to put the dagger in here. And I'll leave that one as 12 this time, basically to show you again how you can change that at a later point. But again, it's 1d minus 1 for a dagger and then DMG for damage. So that's that done. So advantages and disadvantages. In here I tend to put the talents, so basically effectively what are skills and talents in the fantasy trip. So I tend to put them in here as advantages box, just because that's the easiest place to store sort of plain text without any other information beside it in the GURPS Game Aid. So ways you can put it in here, as you can see, is you can either do the entries one line each, or you can use a semicolon to separate them. So I'll kind of show you with this character what I mean. So put things in like climbing. You can do the next line for the next one, and then type in things like handyman, shield, because I want this character to use a shield. Then see if you use a semicolon, you can type the information in there, and then do, if I can spell it again with a capital behind it, do swimming, for example, and the sword skill. And I tend to put languages in here. I can't use a colon because it confuses it, so just put them in like that for now. Say common and dwarven for him, just to do as a test for it. And then what you can do once you've done that, like I said, leave the skills blank in this one, but you click test MOOC, it'll test it, you'll see it move all those talents onto individual lines, which is how it prefers it. And then if you click create MOOC, it then creates a character sheet for you. And you can actually run the game perfectly fine from this character sheet here if you want. If you're not worried about looking at the fantasy trip thing, you can use this. The advantage here is you can do all sorts of fancy things. The thing I do now is pick a picture for him, so if I go into the tokens, you'll find that I can find, hopefully I can find my Flavius token, and hopefully this works. There we go, pull Flavius' picture through, and that'll pull him through, and that means he now has a token as well in the game. We pull it off as well as being his picture for his counter. What you find with this is if you click on things, basically you can then roll successes, etc. for it and bring those things through, and it basically, if you click on it, it does like an auto roll for you. You can do things like your dagger, attacks, for example, then click on damage, and it'll pull that damage through. If you click on it, then it rolls it and does damage for you. So again, if you use this mini sheet, and this is the basic import for basically doing it in a fantasy trip, you can just do everything automatically there. I'm going to pull a quick scene together just to kind of show you how that works. Don't worry too much about how you pull scenes together. This is just to kind of show you what the counters look like, etc. So I'm going to pull on the fantasy trip. So I'm going to pull off, if I go into my Amazon storage here, hang on a second, and then find the map. I've got some basic fantasy trip kind of ones on there. If I bring it in, I'm going to guesstimate the grid size here. So you've kind of got to work out the grid size for this. I won't get into too much on maps and stuff, but the issue with the fantasy trip ones is the grids don't really align properly with things. So basically I tend not to use the grid system on it. I tend to switch it off and put it on gridless instead. Do it that way, and then just move the counters around by hand. Again, because fantasy trip's quite simple, it doesn't really matter so much about the auto counting of hexes, but there are ways if you want to get into it, setting up hexes in the right orientation and getting it. As you can see, I've actually made the hex size too big. This figure should be a lot smaller. So let's go back in and reconfigure the scene. I did my math backwards here, and instead of increasing the thing, or decreasing it by 1.5, I increase it by 1.5. It should be more like 350 really for it. You can also scale down the counters as well if you want to. Advantage of using the counters here with this integration is all the stuff pulls through like hit points. As you can see, I've done them wrong, etc. But we'll do that in a minute. So let me just get the grid size sorted. So go back down 300. You should find the counter then fits a bit more nicely inside the hexes. So there we go. That's kind of your counter moving around the hexes then if we do it that way around. If you hold down control and spin the mouse wheel or use your controllers, you can basically spin the character around and change their facing, which is how you move them in the game. Set the token properly though. If you click on it on basically open up the character sheet and then click on prototype token, you can do things like have the display name show for yourself, for other people, link it to the character sheet, which is important. That way it pulls the damage through between it. When you actually do damage to the counter, it does it to the character sheet as well. Other thing you need to do is set up the resources. So hit points again, you can have that to display as a bar. Fatigue ones you can actually take off because we don't really need those so much. So if you set those to none, it won't show those on there. As I said, we don't tend to use those in Fantasy Trip. I'll fix the hit points here now. Like I said, it should have been 12, so that's now fixed on the counter as well when we pull them through. So it should really lie to strength. It was a mistake of mine when I did the MOOC sheet not to put those ones in. Just making sure I've set everything up perfectly. Yeah, hit points aren't quite right, but I'll sort it out in a minute. So again, now when you pull Flavius across onto the board, you'll see it now has a hit point bar across him, and it has his name below the token, which you can see. And like I said, you can spin it around using the control key there. Show you some of the other implementations. We really need a second character. And in order to do that, we can just click and basically we're going to duplicate Flavius, saving me having to type it all in by hand. But you can again through the MOOC sheet and build someone else new or import it other ways if you know how to do those. But in this case, I'm going to change them. So to edit anything with this one, you have to change it to the edit sheet. And then basically change who he is. If you click on editor, this brings up the actually GCS sheet for GURPS Game Aid. But if you go into this one, you can do things like change the name and change the data. So I'm going to change this one here. So he's going to be Ragnar. I'm going to make him Ragnar the Impetuous that I've used previously in the game and set him up that way. And I'm going to change, like I said, stuff was adjusted deck, so I'm going to move his dagger skill down to 8, which it should be on the sheet. And that's basically show you how you can do other things. You can do is you can change the move on the sheet as well. So if you click on the move there, you can change that move around, and that should import through to the front sheet then. So as I said, I'm going to get a picture of Ragnar. I don't think I put him in my tokens one. I have to find him back in this one. It should be a bit further down if I find him, Ragnar the Impetuous. I have 2 Ragnars in here, so we get the wrong picture first of all. This is actually for someone in one of my games that runs on the actual play that we do. So I'll find the other Ragnar. There he is. Too many Ragnars. Very common name, what can I say? There we go, Ragnar the Impetuous. That's my fancy trip counter one that I needed from. So there we go, that's his counter then set up. So then we go back to the mini sheet. So again, if you click on sheet at the top, and you can change it back to the mini sheet, and there we go, we have Ragnar set up there. I need to change his counter, so when I draw it through, first of all, you'll notice, because the way I've done it, it's got the old counter thing, but you can just change that and go to prototype token. If you click on appearance and then click on that thing next to it, you can then change it to the correct token. If you scroll down, a bit of whistle stop tour by me doing it wrong, showing you how you can change these things, and then you can update the token then based on that one. Make sure it says Ragnar under his coordinate name and update the token, and then when I pull him across now, we have the right person as Ragnar coming through. So there we go. And I said you can use them on the map now. And this means I now have a combatant to basically go with Flavius when we do combat. I'll turn him around so he's facing the right way in this particular case. I said I tend to move them around. I said you can set up the map so they have proper hex tokens on them, move them around properly, but in my case I just tend to drag these around one by one as I'm doing it myself. So the main thing I want to show next really is how the combat system works. Oh yeah, so you can measure things, like I said, when you set the measuring up, you can actually measure distances in the game. These aren't set up properly so they don't look right, but you can measure distances across the map as well. If you set the hexes up, you can choose to do it. But like I said, it's easy to count with Fantasy Trip. You can just tend to count across, so you don't necessarily need to actually set up the hexes, and I tend not to. Well, when I've done it before, we haven't bothered really with setting those up properly. So setting up the combat encounter. As I said, you can click on damage, you can then drag and drop. So basically this is the sort of damage display that comes with the GURPS Game Aid. It does all sort of damage application for you and can pull it across, takes into the effect the DR, like I said, applies in this case the DR2 and takes it off and use the damage as 1. You can know the check penalty and stuff. There is a way to override the DR if the DR has changed. So the number of hits have changed, say because a person's dropped a shield or armed a shield, you can't type that in the DR override button at the bottom here as I'm showing you, and type in things like 0 if they don't have armor, etc., and you can apply it. And then it applies the damage directly to the counter, as you can see there. That's taking the damage off, which applies to the character sheet, pulls it all through for you nicely. And I'll just change it back for you now so you can see. Again as well, with the handy thing of these sheets is you can click on things directly and click on the numbers, like I said, and it pulls things through. You can click on the damage separate as well if you need to, and that works really well for the handy sheets from those point of view. There is a modifier bucket down the bottom here that you can click on. Tend not to use the common modifiers there because they are GURPS setup, not Fantasy Trip, but there is key ones you can type in, just like -2, +2, etc. So if you know the modifiers for Fantasy Trip, you can just click on a token, add that, and then it adds to it. So again, if you click on the short sword, see it's applied the -2 to the skill made it 6, and amazingly the person's still hit. And again, the damage can be rolled and it can be applied and dragged across as before. So it means again you can do this very good implementation. So using the mini NPC sheet is quite good for that kind of integration. You keep stuff up there, you just have to ignore the extra stuff that's there for GURPS. But then from that point of view, you can just run it. And that's kind of, I guess, from my point of view, the simplest way of kind of running it using that system, and basically kind of doing it from that way. So hopefully that kind of makes some sort of sense as to how you'd set that system up. Going to show you some of the other modules now that I was talking about. So to get those ones up and running, you have to actually go into the Manage Module section, add Dice and Ice, Dice Tray, and then also the PDF character sheet, and I shall show you how all these work in a second. So you have to get those in, then you have to save those module settings. It will have to restart the server quickly, which is very brief in this case, and should bring it back in again. There you go, have to reload the map again. Cool, so you can set up your dice, as you can see that settings at the side, but just keep it standard. So the dice tray, you can do things like click on the bottom and the dice will sort of appear at the bottom of the screen for you, and again you can roll them. And with dice and dice, it means you actually roll as 3D dice, as you can see, so you get these nice cool 3D dice with a nice rolling dice sound on the screen as well. So it's quite cool to have that kind of running. So it's something I can recommend to get, and again if it's 1d6, you just click that d6 symbol once and you can press roll and roll it. And that's kind of an easy way to get that on the screen and do those multiple dice rolls if you want to do some. If you are just rolling 3d6, there is a 3d6 symbol at the bottom of the screen, which is what most of the rolls are in these games. Again, it's based around GURPS, but it's there and you can just click it once and it rolls the dice, and that's quite a quick way of doing that 3d6 roll. So again, if you don't want to use the implementation on the sheet for some of the stuff, you can just straight roll those dice and get those numbers, and it saves a lot of time having to mess around with it. As ever, Dice and Ice, there is a way to take a tour if you want to see what else it does, and go on there and have a look at it. So we're going to have a look next, I think, at setting up the PDF sheets for these characters. So if you look at the editor now, you now have this option basically to change what the character sheet's going to be. But in order to do that, what you have to do first of all is set up the PDF sheet. So you go into the journal tab at the top there, you go to the bottom and create PDF. Then you have to give your PDF a name. I tend to use a short one, so I'll say like simple fighter sheet first of all, and to do one for the fighter. And then you'll have to have the file somewhere, so I've got mine set up already on my storage. So if I go into my PDFs, there we go, and I should have it down. There's a few of these kicking around, so I've done lots of testing with it, but there's an improved Fighter version 2 sheet that I use now. So you click on that, select it, and then basically you have to set it up to enable caching and also change the PDF type to a character sheet. So enable caching means it stays loaded, and if you change that one at the bottom then from static to form fillable actor sheet, that means that when you then run it, it should hopefully then pull through in your actor as a character sheet. So you can do test settings to test it, which we don't really need to do in this case, but it's useful for the PDFs. So that's set up now. So that sheet's all there integrated now, so what you have to do now is put it on the character. So again, if we open up Flavius, click on sheet at the top and change the NPC MIDI one now to the one that says PDF one for the actor sheet, and then what you find now is you now get a nice lovely PDF option screen, and you pick which one you want. In this case there will only be one, which is Simple Fighter, so we shall confirm it. And then what you find is you now have the fighter sheet here, and what you'll find is it's pulled a lot of the information through already, so that's quite handy. So just kind of very briefly kind of talk you through some of this one. So as I said, the way it works is that I've set up these PDFs with the names around the sort of different various properties. So one thing you have to do is type in the movement allowance for what the maximum movement allowance is, because that's not a field set up in GURPS, and the one next to it then is your sort of adjusted move. Other things like strength, dex, IQ pull through. So again, if you move allowance, if they're wearing armor, you can drop that and change it around, change it to something like 6/8, whatever that it actually happens to be, and just free type it in there and it should pull it through. It sometimes doesn't work, I've noticed. I don't really know what the problem is, but occasionally that doesn't pull through properly into the NPC MIDI sheet. But as long as you know and you have that information in there, it should possibly pull both things across. What there also is the ability to type in your armor. So you can type in here, for example, chainmail, which stops. Let's get it typed in here. Stops 3 hits per attack, and then we can type in shield, large shield, which stops another 2 hits per attack. And then because we've done that, that's when it's ready as well. You can get that open already. And then again, we have to then change the MA around this character, and also we have to change the adjusted dex around this too. So what we do is we change the adjusted dex down to 8, and that actually changes what the character's speed is in the game, which makes sense from a GURPS perspective. And then we change the MA to 6, like I said. Now, it doesn't do an awful lot on the screen, but if we move you back to the NPC mini screen, this is where I've noticed the issue with the speed sometimes doesn't pull through. You should then find that the speed ought to change and the move ought to change. So the speed's gone to 8, which is right, the move didn't in this case. I couldn't get it to work. I've tried to fix the character sheet. I'm not quite sure why it sometimes happens and sometimes doesn't. It's a bit of an issue on my end around what I've named it, I think. But you also find that the chainmail and large shield are now shown up in the equipment list, including the information. The other thing you have to do is change the DR. DR is still at 2 because it doesn't pull through DR automatically, so you have to go into the editor screen basically to change that DR, which will show you. So if you click on editor, go to torso DR, and basically change that to 5 in this case because it's a 2 and a 3. You pull through to the PDF character sheet back again now. All that information's still there we typed in previously. So I kind of like these sheets. The only things that's worth noticing on those sheets is that they're not automated, so nothing clicking on pulls through and does things automatically. It's a bit of a limitation around the PDF sheet, but it is still quite cool to have those there. I like it from the simplicity point of view of using it. Just to show you that the DR has worked, if I pull that damage across, you'll now see the DR shows up as 5. So that means that when you do that damage now, basically those number of hits from those items apply automatically. So again, it's a quick way of kind of automating that damage when you do it. That makes sense. And again, like I said, if you decide the shield's not ready, you can't just type in 3 in that override box at the bottom. You'll find again that stops all the damage. But that gives you some sort of sense of the fact that you can just change that if you want to type it in and make it different from what was actually on the character sheet. So yeah, like I said, the swords and damages are there, weapons, etc. But if you click on them, it's just a free text box on the screen, so you can't actually automatically roll, and that applies to all the stuff on there. But I quite like it as a simple sheet to have for players, say for them to see, and basically have that information. They can free type it and change the information on there. Doesn't break anything. Excuse me, I also resize it on the screen a bit so you can see it. There we go. As I said, you can just in this case like roll 3d6, etc. and then see it. And again, you can roll 2d6 by adding it to the dice tray and doing that one from the dice tray and roll those things and then compare those. And likewise, you can roll the damage and do -1, say for example, onto things and then rolls it. It'll do t6 -1. So you can just do plain rolls and just free type things in and just, you know, type numbers in yourself if you don't want to worry about too much about having the automation in there. As I said, if you go back to the NPC menu one, it is a bit easier because you can just click on the buttons and do it, and somebody change it. That dagger one's not changed to it, I just noticed there. What you can also do is drag and drop things from your weapon. So you can drag and drop, say, the attack roll from the weapon and the damage from the weapon and put them in there. And then what that means is for your players, say if they're doing this way, they can put all their attacks on the screen there. I'm going to shrink this PDF down again a second, just bear with me, it's a mess around with it on the screen. Just to get it out of the way so I can show you the bar in a second. I hate trying to shrink this on the screen, there's a bit of a delay. The way around my online server sometimes it's a bit slow, so you have to excuse me messing around, it seems to flag it. There is a module called Pop Out as well you can get if you want to pop out character sheets so they're not getting in the way of the screen. I definitely recommend it as an option, just so it's not in the way when you're doing stuff. There we go. So yeah, I said so that you can click on the macro down there. Oh yeah, I have to fix this one. There's a weird foible I've noticed that for some reason that macro for the sword, it puts an extra space in it, so you just have to get rid of the space before the M in there, and then if you save the macro, it will then work when you click on it. It might be fixed this last time. And what you get again is that short sword attack, and it therefore tells you it's missed, and again you can roll the damage, and you can drag and drop the damage from that. So for players, they can basically drag and drop their common attacks and damage and basically put those in there, and they can just click those buttons. And again, it's a numeric keypad for those shortcuts, you just have to press number 1 and 2 on the keypad as well, and it'll roll those attacks. So that's a really good shortcut for players, basically, to save them have to do things. So it's quite useful, I find, basically, for having it there. You can also then go into the picture and change the picture. So for example, we can turn the sword one into the picture of a sword. And just save that. And then for the damage, oops, that's the right thing. Again, click on the picture of that dice and change it to blood. And then you can save that then as a sort of blood splatter for your attack, and then therefore you've now got those lovely pictures there for your players, so they can just do that from their character sheets. And basically that's good macros for them to set up for themselves if they want to, and then they don't have to worry about clicking between sheets. So they can then use the sort of PDF sheet but still have that quick link there to their attacks and damage rolls, which is quite a cool way of doing it. And there's ways to set up other things like, you know, spell effects and things as well using those macros, which are quite cool. Again, with things like hit points and stuff, you can just type damage straight in, so you don't have to use the full implementation if you don't want to. You can just do as I'm doing just now on the sheet, you know, changing the hit points, etc. on it and everything you want to. So hopefully that makes some kind of sense. Again, with the talents and stuff, you can just adjust those too on the sheets how you want to. I think I said before, adjusted dex there actually relates to speed from GURPS. That's going to be important in a minute when we look at the initiative system. But movement allowance again should show up on the screen as move. I don't know why it doesn't, but I had a little bit of an issue with the implementation when I was setting up this video. It seems to work on my other system. I don't know why it doesn't on this one. Let me just go into the editor and mess around. We change the move on there to 6, which is the current move. I think that managed to fix it. So again, there is ways to always edit these things in there if you need to. Again, it's not so much a worry because movement and stuff, you can just go off that sheet. You don't need to have it implemented necessarily on the sheet. As long as you know you're moving at level 6, when you're moving across the board, you'll know how those things work. So next thing we're going to look at, I think, is around how you set up some of the other macros for the game that I've kind of set up around this one. So one thing you'll find is that you want to roll multiple dice in the game when you're playing it. So what you can do is create a new macro and a new bar. You can go up and down different and do something like 1d6. And in the command then you can do the chat command, which is /r1d6, and save that. What it means then is if you click on that button there, it'll now roll 1d6. And then what you can do is what I do is I go down the line from 1. So for example, number 3 becomes 3d6. And I'll do /r3d6 in the command. Save that one, and then say in 66 in the 6th one, and I do that all the way across. So I do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 this way. So 66 /r66, and then save that macro. And then what it means is you can basically press a number on the keypad between 1 and 6. Depending on which one you press is how many dice it rolls. And I find that a really quick way of setting up those macros, basically for when you play in the game and you want to roll those different variable skill checks, etc. And it just rolls it automatically for you when you click at them. And I find that very useful. And again, those are macros that you can then share across to players. And so the most common one, you roll 3d6, and again it's quite useful kind of having that 3d6 button at the bottom to roll it. And one of the things you have as well is that all the macros are in a folder, so again you can sort of share those with all the players, and you can create folders and stuff to put them into subfolders if you want to, so players can just drag them around and put them into their own macro bars if they want to. So you can set all the dice up, for example, in advance, and players can just drag those into wherever they want to drag them, and then use them how they want to use them. So yeah, like I said, the main thing I would suggest is that for players, I'd say use the PDF sheets, but as a GM, you're probably better off using the NPC mini sheet for your characters. It probably makes it easier moving between multiple characters or multiple attacks if you can just click on those links already embedded into that NPC mini sheet. But if the players want to use the ones they can. I'm going to show combat now. So if you drag and select counters and combat and clicked on the sword and shield button, it basically moves them into the combat menu. So if I do that now, move it over to the combat menu at the top, you'll see they're now showing up. And there's buttons up here basically to roll for them. Now what you find is it rolls 1d6, and then basically it sets them in speed order. So that goes off speed, which is a GURPS thing. Now I've linked the speed characteristic in the character sheet to the adjusted dex, which is that little box next to the dex here. So as you can see, Flavius is showing up as 8 and Ragnar is 12, because we haven't put any armor Ragnar, at least not in the implementation of it. And so it sets it up. So what you'll find is that this is quite good for the combat order. What you will notice is the numbers are really far down the bottom end, and that's because it's set up for GURPS with like 0.25s and 0.5s of speed, which is why that's set up, and then it has then links to the dex score of them and then a d6 roll. So what you can actually do is configure how that works. If you go to configure settings, go to the GURPS Game Aid system, and then what it says you can simplify the initiative system. So if you actually go into the initiative calculation, which I shall show you, you can basically take out that section which refers to dex value. So just get rid of that completely, because we don't use that one in the fantasy trip, so it comes out. And then you can also simplify the one around the 1d6, but I'll show you that one now. So if you go back into, I think they're already still in combat. Let me have a look. Restart combat for them. Roll it again. You'll now see that it just uses the d6 at the end as a way of breaking that tie. So this is quite good in the sense it works. So this basically means it works in how your speed works for your weapons. If you're rolling for initiative for movement, again, just stick to the normal thing. I just roll separate dice outside of this tracker and do it that way, but it's quite good for keeping track of that. So when you're in combat, knowing who's going next as to go to attacking, and basically you can advance it at the bottom by clicking on the next round. It moves to the next person, and again I'll move on to the next round. You can go backwards as well if you made a mistake, but you go to round 2. A bit harder to see with just 2 combatants, but it basically would move down the line if you had more than 2, and it basically goes off that dex and then rolls for the NPCs and rolls for the characters, and basically that d6 becomes that tie break, like I said. So there you go. You can just leave that trailing number right at the end. You can also adjust the formula as well if you want to and bring that a bit higher up, but you don't necessarily need to. But there you go. That's kind of how it works. It just shows you it just rolls that d6 each time. So yeah, like I said, the numbers are far at the end. So if you go into configure modules, if you don't like how far away that is, you can configure the settings. So you don't mess this one up, because you've got to be careful how you do it. And you can then basically take out that 1000 from it. And then that should, if I've set it up properly, if I get them to reroll initiative. There we go. Basically makes like a 0.6. So you can times it by 10 and make it 0.6, but that's a bit easier to take some of the leading zeros out of it, but you can mess around where you want them to appear. As I said, it makes no difference really to how they show up on the list, but again, it might make it a bit neater if you don't want to have to see that number from the far end. But the idea is quite simple. That d6 then becomes that tiebreaker for people who've got the same adjusted dex bonus around it. So hopefully that makes some kind of sense, and you can see that from the combat. So something you can do, for example, is that you can update the combatant. If you want to change their speed, you can just right-click on them and do update combatant to change it if it's a temporary change. So for example, if Ragnar took some damage, say, and it slowed down his adjusted dex, and he might drop down to 7, say, and do that, and then moves where he lands in the initiative order. So again, if he's not already made his maneuver in combat, it might change it, and he might go a bit slower. So it's worth having that in there, just to kind of have that one integrated in there. Also, if you change it in the character sheet, that will pull through automatically as well. If there's some more permanent things, like if they drop a shield, for example, and you change that, that will pull through in the speed one then. But that's kind of it in an overview. So we'll end combat now to show you. Yeah, so hopefully that makes some kind of sense, and that's kind of showing you some of the implementation that I've got around the fantasy trip using the GURPS Game Aid. Main things to kind of say around, I guess, last thing to mention is the talents thing kind of pulls through, like I said, with the character sheets. If you use the wizard sheet, the main difference is that it just changes that picture of that sword into a wizard staff, as goes a simple thing. I do have plans in the future to try and implement the full into the labyrinth sheet, but that's going to take a bit more integration. Like I said, I can't at the moment pull in the full integration from things like, you know, the attack rolls and stuff from the sheet. There might be a way to do it, but I don't know what it is yet. But you can just pull those macros through, like I've said, and otherwise most of the stuff kind of pulls through. I will be putting links to these character sheets on a Google Drive, so you'll be able to get, I'm going to try to put the link in the notes for this video, and you can pull them through if you want to use them, and hopefully then you can integrate it straight away using the modules I showed you. Any problems with the sheet, any concerns, please drop me a line and let me know. Try to think if there's anything else I really need to show you. Like so the talents and things, they do pull through onto the character sheet. If you look at the NPC mini sheets and the full ones, you can kind of see the way it sort of fits through. It's going to show you making the next one. Other thing you can do is also pull rules in. So again, if you create a journal called rules and do a proper journal and change it to PDF and call it just something like, you know, into labyrinth rules here, ITL, you can then also then link that PDF if you have the PDF. That's where I'm hoping I've still got this in this folder somewhere. I have a lot of junk in here, play a lot of games. Yeah, there you go, fantasy trip into labyrinth. And bring those in. Page offset too. Sometimes you've offset from the code, you need it. That's important if you want to link it to anything else. And then basically what you'll find then is that once it's finished loading from my server, you can actually have the rules a journal entry that people can open up and basically read during the game. So that's a little cool interface that you have just through core Foundry these days. You don't need a module for this anymore, it's just in there as core. And so that's quite a handy little thing to have there too. And like I said, there are ways to link in other journals, links to pages, so that you click on numbers and basically it'll open straight up to particular pages, and it might show that in a later video if anyone's interested in seeing that. But that's quite a cool way, like I said, of having that kind of character sheet in there. So again, that's kind of it for today. So hopefully that's been of some use to anyone out there who was thinking about using this as part of their system. Any questions or comments, please feel free to kind me on the Discord server. You can also email me at gmshadow@hotmail.com, and I am kicking around on Twitter as well at gmshadow. So yeah, again, thanks for listening to this, and hopefully that's helpful for you all. And until next time, everyone, then take care, and I hope to speak to you again soon.